Good evening, and welcome to Midnight Whispers Stories. Here, in the frozen wilderness of Alaska, the night never ends. The wind carries whispers that sound almost human, and sometimes whispers your name. Today, its stories come from the edge of the map, from frozen towns swallowed by snow, oil camps abandoned overnight, and lonely roads where headlights disappear into nowhere. These are real encounters, told by people who were never the same again. If you can hear my voice right now, then just listen. Join the darkness. Subscribe to Midnight Whispers Stories so you will never be alone with the night. Click on the bell icon, because when new horrors rise from the ice, I'll want to be the first to know. And after listening, leave a comment. Tell us where in the world you listening from. Your thoughts support this channel, and sometimes the creatures in the darkness are listening too. Now get comfortable, because in Alaska, the cold isn't empty. It is watching. Story 1. Time slip. I have a gold nugget in my safe deposit box that, according to 3 separate geologists, should not exist. And I need you to understand that I am not crazy. My name is David Mitchell. I am 42 years old. I work as a regional manager for a telecommunications company in Anchorage. I have a mortgage, a decent credit score, and until 6 weeks ago, I had never experienced anything I could not explain with logic and reason. But on September 15th, while walking along the beach in Nome, Alaska, I disappeared from 2024 and spent 4 hours in 1899. I know how that sounds. I have played it over in my mind 10,000 times, searching for rational explanations. Hallucination, seizure, some kind of dissociative episode brought on by stress or a brain tumor I do not know about yet. I have seen doctors, had MRIs, talked to psychiatrists who nod and smile and suggest medication. But none of them can explain the gold nugget. None of them can explain why my clothes were covered in mud that carbon dating places it over a century old. None of them can explain the photograph. I was in Nome for work, overseeing the installation of new cell towers in the region. It was supposed to be a 3-day trip. Standard stuff. I had finished my site inspections early and decided to take a walk along the beach before my flight back to Anchorage. The weather was clear, unusually warm for mid-September. The Bering Sea stretched out gray and endless to my left, and the town sat quiet to my right. I had been walking for maybe 20 minutes when I felt it. A pressure change, like when your ears pop on an airplane, but all over my body. The air suddenly felt thick, harder to move through. I stopped walking. The sound of the waves had changed. They were louder, more aggressive. The light had shifted too, becoming somehow both brighter and hazier at the same time. Then the world folded. That is the only way I can describe it. Reality bent like a piece of paper being creased down the middle, and I fell through the fold. There was no tunnel of light, no spinning sensation. One moment I was standing on a modern beach with the distant hum of generators and vehicles in the background. The next moment, I was standing in the exact same spot, but everything had changed. The town was different, smaller. The buildings were wooden structures, rough and hastily built. Canvas tents dotted the beach and hillside by the hundreds. Smoke rose from countless fires. The air smelled of burning coal, unwashed bodies, and something else. Desperation. You could smell it like a physical thing, sharp and metallic. And the noise, God, the noise. Hundreds of voices shouting, arguing, laughing. The sound of hammers on wood. Dogs barking. The scrape of shovels on frozen ground. It was overwhelming, a wall of sound that hit me like a physical force. I stood frozen, trying to process what I was seeing. Men in heavy wool coats and battered hats moved past me, some pulling sleds loaded with supplies. Their faces were weathered, hardened by the cold and the desperate hunger for gold that had driven them to this remote edge of the world. Nobody looked at me. It was as if I was not there, or as if I was perfectly normal and belonged in this place. I looked down at myself. My modern hiking jacket and jeans were still there, but they seemed faded somehow, less substantial. I could see my hands clearly, feel the cold wind on my face, but there was a dreamlike quality to everything, like I was watching myself from a slight distance. A man pushed past me, close enough that I smelled the rancid fish oil on his clothes. He was real, solid. I stumbled backward, my heart hammering. This was not a hallucination. Hallucinations do not have smell. They do not have the physical presence of another human body shoving past you. I started walking, moving through the chaos of what I realized was Nome during the gold rush. I had read about this period. In 1899, gold was discovered on the beaches of Nome, and within months, thousands of prospectors flooded into the area, creating a lawless tent city almost overnight. I was looking at it. I was standing in it. The beach was crowded with people working claims, sifting through the sand and gravel with pans and rockers. Some were knee-deep in the frigid water, their hands red and swollen from the cold. Others crouched over small fires, cooking meager meals or melting snow for drinking water. The desperation was palpable. These were men who had gambled everything on the dream of gold, who had traveled thousands of miles through brutal conditions, and who were now facing the reality that most of them would find nothing. I walked past a tent with its flap open. Inside, I could see 3 men huddled around a small stove. One of them was coughing, deep rattling coughs that shook his entire body. Another was wrapping his feet in strips of cloth, his boots sitting beside him with the soles worn completely through. They did not notice me watching. The wrongness of the situation was beginning to sink in. I checked my pockets. My phone was there, but the screen was dead, black and unresponsive. My wallet was there. Everything was where it should be, but nothing worked. I tried to speak to someone, to ask what was happening. But when I opened my mouth, no sound came out. Or if it did, nobody heard it. I was a ghost in this place, present but not present, able to observe but not interact. I kept walking, moving away from the beach and toward the hillside where more tents and rough structures had been erected. The ground was churned mud mixed with ice, and I could see the dark stains where men had relieved themselves or dumped waste. There was no sanitation, no order, just thousands of people crammed into a space too small, all fighting for the same impossible dream. That is when I saw the claim marker, a wooden stake driven into the ground with a name carved into it, Mitchell. My last name. The claim was being worked by a man who looked to be in his 30s, thin and worn down by hard labor. He had dark hair and a thick beard, but there was something about his eyes, the shape of his face, that was familiar. He looked like my grandfather, not the grandfather I had known, who died when I was 12, old and frail in a hospital bed, but a younger version, the man he might have been before time and age wore him down. I stood there staring at him, and for just a moment, he looked up. His eyes met mine, and he saw me. I know he saw me because his expression changed, his face going pale, his mouth opening in shock. He dropped the pan he was holding, gold sand spilling across the frozen ground, and took a step toward me. Then the world snapped back. The fold reversed itself with a physical jolt that knocked me to my knees. The noise cut off like someone had thrown a switch. The smell of coal smoke and bodies disappeared, replaced by the clean salt smell of the modern ocean. The tents and rough structures were gone. In their place was the quiet, nearly empty beach of present-day Nome. I was on my hands and knees in the sand, gasping for air, my heart beating so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. My phone was buzzing in my pocket. I pulled it out. It was working again. The screen showed 16 missed calls and dozens of text messages. I checked the time. 4 hours had passed. 4 hours that I could not account for, that existed only in my memory of a place that had not existed for over a century. I looked at my hands. They were covered in mud. Not modern beach sand, but thick, dark mud mixed with ice. The kind of mud I had seen in that other place. My boots were caked with it. My jeans were splattered up to the knees. And in my pocket, something hard and heavy that had not been there before. I pulled it out, a gold nugget, rough and unpolished, about the size of my thumb. It was real, solid, heavy in my palm. I stumbled back to my hotel room and called my wife, told her I was sick, that I needed to stay in Nome an extra day. I could not get on a plane, could not face people. I spent that night sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at the gold nugget, trying to convince myself that there was a rational explanation. When I got back to Anchorage, I took the nugget to a geologist at the university. He examined it, ran tests, and gave me a report that I still have. The gold was consistent with placer gold found in the Nome region. But the sediment attached to it, the microscopic particles embedded in the surface, dated to the late 19th century. He could not explain it. He suggested I had found it in an old collection or that someone had given it to me as a gift and I had forgotten. But I knew the truth. That nugget had not existed in my pocket before I walked through that fold in reality. It had come from that other place, from 1899. I started researching. I found records of the Nome gold rush, lists of claims, and there it was, a Mitchell claim, registered in July 1899 to a man named Thomas Mitchell, my great-great-grandfather. A man I had never heard of because he had died in Nome that winter, frozen to death in his tent during a blizzard. The family never talked about him. It was a shameful story, a cautionary tale about greed and foolishness. But I had seen him. I had stood on his claim and watched him work. And he had seen me. Then I found the photograph. It was in the university archives, part of a collection of Gold Rush-era images. The photo was taken in Nome in September 1899. It showed a crowd of prospectors on the beach, working their claims. And in the background, slightly out of focus, there was a figure. A man in modern clothes standing among the tents, facing the camera. The resolution was poor, the image grainy and faded. But I could make out enough detail to recognize the jacket. My jacket, the same one I had been wearing that day. I am in a photograph taken 125 years ago. I have not gone back to Nome. I am terrified of what might happen if I do. Terrified that the fold might open again, that I might fall through and not come back this time. But I dream about it. Every night. I dream I am standing on that beach, watching Thomas Mitchell work his claim. And he is looking at me with those terrified eyes, and I know he is seeing his own future. He is seeing the descendant who will live long enough to witness miracles he cannot imagine. Airplanes, computers, a world connected by invisible signals that I help maintain. And I wonder if he hates me for it, for having the life he never got to live. The gold nugget sits in my safe deposit box. I do not look at it anymore, but I know it is there, impossible and real, proof that time is not the straight line we pretend it is. Proof that the past is not gone, just folded away, waiting. And sometimes, when the pressure changes just right, the fold opens. Story 2. Flight 1862. Every person on Alaska Airlines Flight 1862 lost 18 minutes of their life on November 9, 2004. And I'm the only one who remembers what happened during that time. My name is Captain Richard Hayes. I've been flying commercial aircraft for 26 years, over 15,000 flight hours. Spotless record, the kind of pilot passengers never worry about because nothing ever goes wrong on my watch. Until the day something impossible happened at 39,000 feet over the Gulf of Alaska. We departed Anchorage at 2:14 p.m. Routine flight to Seattle, 147 passengers, 5 crew members, Boeing 737. Perfect weather, clear skies, light winds. The kind of flight where you could set the autopilot and read a book. I was reviewing our flight plan when First Officer Sandra Chen pointed at the instruments. Our altimeter was drifting, showing 39,000 feet, then 39,200, then 38,800, fluctuating randomly despite our altitude being locked. I checked the backup systems, same erratic readings, then the GPS started acting strange. Our position jumped. We were suddenly 3 miles east of where we should be, then back, then 5 miles west. Like reality couldn't decide where we actually were. I radioed Anchorage Center, reported instrument malfunction, asked them to confirm our position and altitude. Static, no response. I tried again, more static. Then a voice came through, but it wasn't air traffic control. It wasn't even human. The sound was wrong, too deep, too layered, like multiple voices speaking in perfect unison but slightly out of phase with each other. The words were English, but the cadence was off. Mechanical, rehearsed. The voice told us to maintain current heading, maintain current altitude, await further instructions. Then the radio went dead. Complete silence across all frequencies. Sandra looked at me. Her face was pale. She heard it too. We both had that impossible voice that shouldn't exist on aviation frequencies. I switched to the emergency frequency. Nothing. Tried the company channel. Nothing. Complete radio silence. Like every communication system in North America had suddenly gone offline. Then the cabin pressure alarm went off. We weren't losing pressure. The alarm was just screaming. Sensors showing normal. Passengers weren't experiencing any distress. But that alarm kept wailing, kept insisting something was catastrophically wrong even though nothing was. I silenced it, checked all systems. Everything read normal. Perfect. Except our instruments still couldn't agree on where we were or how high we were flying. That is when I noticed the light through the cockpit window. Below us, something glowing in the water. Huge, circular, maybe 2 miles across. Bright blue-white light emanating from beneath the surface of the Gulf of Alaska. It was following us, matching our speed, maintaining position directly below our flight path. The light was so bright I could see details in the water. Could see currents. Could see what looked like geometric patterns radiating from the center. Sandra saw it too. Started taking photos with her phone. I didn't stop her. We Do you need evidence? Need proof this was real? The light intensified, got brighter, started pulsing, rhythmic, regular, like a heartbeat, and with each pulse, our instruments went haywire. Altimeter spinning, GPS jumping hundreds of miles, compass rotating without stopping. Then everything went dark. Not the instruments. Everything. The cockpit, the cabin, the sky, complete in total darkness, like someone had turned off the sun, like reality had blinked. I couldn't to see Sandra, couldn't to see the instruments, couldn't to see my own hands. Just absolute darkness and that sound, that voice, coming from everywhere, coming from inside my head. It wasn't speaking English anymore, wasn't speaking anything recognizable, just sounds, frequencies, patterns that seemed to bypass my ears and resonate directly in my brain. Information being downloaded, instructions being uploaded, my mind being accessed like a computer hard drive. I tried to resist, tried to think about something else, anything else, but the sounds kept coming, kept drilling into my consciousness, kept showing me things, images, memories that weren't to mine, places I'd never been, events I'd never witnessed. I saw the Earth from space but wrong. The continents were in different positions. The oceans were different colors, like I was seeing a different version of our planet, an alternate timeline, a parallel reality. I saw structures beneath the Gulf of Alaska, massive, ancient, built from materials that shouldn't exist, technology that was simultaneously primitive and impossibly advanced. And I understood this wasn't just light in the water. This was a gateway, an access point, a place where our world touched something else. The images kept coming, faster, more intense. I saw other flights, other planes, dozens of them, all flying over the same spot, all experiencing the same thing. Going back decades, going back to the beginning of commercial aviation. Every plane that crossed this specific coordinate was scanned, measured, analyzed. The passengers, the crew, the technology, everything recorded, everything studied by something that existed in that other place. That other version of reality bleeding through into ours. And I saw what they were looking for, what they'd been searching for across all those flights, all those thousands of people scanned over decades. They were looking for someone specific, someone compatible, someone who could survive the transition, who could exist in both worlds, who could serve as a bridge. The darkness lifted, light returned. I was back in the cockpit. Sandra was staring straight ahead, eyes glassy, unresponsive. The instruments were normal, altitude locked, position confirmed, radio crackling with air traffic control asking why we'd gone silent for 18 minutes. 18 minutes. That's how long the darkness had lasted. How long we'd been inside whatever that thing was. But it felt like seconds, felt like hours, felt like no time at all. I responded to ATC, apologized for the radio trouble, reported everything normal, continued our flight to Seattle like nothing had happened. But Sandra wasn't responding, wasn't moving, just staring. I reached over, touched her shoulder. She blinked, looked at me confused, asked what was wrong, asked why I looked so pale. She didn't remember the light, the darkness, the voice, nothing. Her last memory was checking the instruments before we lost contact. Everything between was just gone, erased. I asked what she remembered about the last 20 minutes. She looked genuinely confused, insisted nothing unusual had happened. We'd been flying normally. She'd been monitoring instruments. Standard procedure. I pulled out my phone, checked the timestamps on her photos, the ones she'd taken of the light in the water. They were gone, not deleted, never existed. Her photo gallery jumped from images before the flight to images after. An 18-minute gap where pictures should be. We landed in Seattle without incident. I filed a standard report, mentioned brief radio communication issues. Nothing more. Didn't mention the light, the voice, the darkness. What would I say? How would I explain something I couldn't even fully remember myself? The passengers deplaned normally, happy, relaxed, grateful for a smooth flight. None of them knew. None of them remembered. Just me, only me. But that night, I started having dreams. Not dreams exactly, memories of things that happened during those 18 minutes. Things I shouldn't remember, things I wasn't supposed to retain. I saw the scanning process in detail, saw invisible beams passing through the aircraft, through every person, reading DNA, reading brain patterns, reading something deeper, something that defined who we were at a fundamental level. And I saw the results. 146 passengers showed normal, unremarkable, standard human baseline, but 3 people showed something different, something that made the scanning equipment react, made whatever was controlling it pay attention. Sandra, a passenger in seat 27C, and me. We had something, some genetic marker, some neurological pattern, something that made us compatible, made us candidates, made us valuable. The other two were marked, tagged. I could see it in my dreams. Some invisible stamp placed on their consciousness, some way to track them, to monitor them, to recall them when needed. I was different. They'd done something else to me, something more invasive, more permanent. I could feel it, a presence in my mind, a connection that hadn't existed before, a link to that place beneath the water, that gateway, that other reality. I tried to find the passenger from 27C, man named David Torres, software engineer from Seattle. Company records showed his contact information. I called, left messages, sent emails, no response. I checked social media. His accounts went silent after the flight. No posts, no updates, just stopped, like he vanished, like he'd been erased. Sandra started avoiding me. Wouldn't he make eye contact? Wouldn't he discuss the flight? Requested different routes, different schedules, anything to avoid flying with me again. I cornered her in the crew lounge one day, asked if she remembered anything unusual, anything strange. She got angry, told me to leave her alone, told me nothing happened, told me to stop asking questions. But her hands were shaking. Her eyes kept darting to the window, to the sky, like she was watching for something, like she knew something was out there even if she couldn't. Do you remember what? The dreams got worse, more detailed, more invasive. I wasn't just seeing memories anymore. I was seeing real-time feeds, live connections to that place beneath the Gulf of Alaska. I could see other people, other flights, other scans happening right now. The process was accelerating. More flights, more passengers, more candidates being identified and marked. And I could see the purpose, the end game. They weren't just studying us. They were preparing, building something, creating an infrastructure, getting ready for something massive, something that would require those compatible humans, those tagged individuals, those bridges between realities. I reported sick, took medical leave, couldn't to fly anymore, couldn't to risk crossing the coordinate again, couldn't to risk strengthening whatever connection had been established. But it didn't matter. The connection was permanent. The link was active. Distance was irrelevant. I could feel that place pulling at me, calling me, wanting me to return, to complete whatever process had been started. Last week, I drove to the coast, stood on the beach, stared out at the water, and I saw it, that light, that blue-white glow, not in Alaska, here, off the Washington coast. The gateway had moved, or multiplied, or was revealing itself because I could finally see it properly. The voice came back, that layered, impossible voice, speaking inside my head without sound, telling me it was time to return, time to serve my purpose, time to become what I'd been selected to become. I understood then, we weren't passengers, we were cargo. The entire flight was a delivery system, bringing compatible humans to scanning range, identifying candidates, marking them, programming them. 147 people on flight 1862, 147 potential bridges, 147 tools for whatever exists in that other reality. That place that touches ours through deep water, through specific coordinates, through moments when the barrier's thin. They took 18 minutes from all of us, but they gave me back something else. Awareness, memory, purpose. I am supposed to spread it, supposed to tell others, supposed to help identify more candidates, more bridges, more tools, but I am fighting it, writing this instead, warning anyone who will listen. Done to fly over the Gulf of Alaska. Done to cross those specific coordinates. Done to become what I am becoming. Because I can feel it happening. The transformation, the transition. My thoughts aren't entirely my own anymore. My memories are mixing with something else. Someone else. Something that exists in that other place. That other reality. Sandra called me yesterday. First time in months. Her voice was flat, emotionless. She said she understood now. Said she'd been dreaming too. Said it was time to stop fighting. Time to accept. Time to return. She is flying back to Anchorage next week. Requested a specific route. One that crosses those coordinates. She is bringing others. Other crew members. Other compatible candidates. They were all hearing the call. All feeling the pull. And I want to join them. God help me. Part of me wants to go. Wants to fly over that water again. Wants to sink into that light. Wants to complete the process. Become the bridge. Serve the purpose. But I'm writing this first, while I still can, while I still have enough of Richard Hayes left to resist, to warn, to fight. If you flew on Alaska Airlines Flight 1862 on November 9, 2004, check your memories. Really check them. See if there is a gap. See if something is missing. See if something was added. And if you start having dreams about lights in deep water, about voices that speak in frequencies, about places where reality touches something else, run, resist, done, to go back. Because they were waiting. They were always waiting. In the deep places, in the gaps between worlds, in the coordinates where our reality touches theirs, waiting for the bridges to return, waiting for the transition to complete, waiting for all of us to finally understand what they'd become. The call is getting stronger. I don't have much time left. Much humanity left. Soon I'll be more bridge than man. More gateway than person. More tool than Richard Hayes. Fly safe. Stay away from deep water. And if your instruments start going crazy over the Gulf of Alaska, pray you, not compatible. Pray you, not selected. Pray they leave your 18 minutes blank. Because remembering is so much worse. Story 3. Screaming ground. I walked across frozen ground that screamed like dying people, and 3 members of my exploration team never made it back to tell anyone what we found out there. My name is David Reichert. I am 51 years old, a geological surveyor who spent 23 years working for oil companies in some of the most remote places on Earth. I retired early, moved to Colorado, and I have not set foot in Alaska since 1987. What happened on the North Slope that winter is something I have tried to forget for decades, but the screams still wake me up at night. Not in my memory, actually wake me up, because sometimes, when it is very quiet and very cold, I can still hear them coming from beneath the ground. It was January 1987. Our team of 6 was conducting preliminary surveys for a potential drilling site about 60 miles inland from Prudhoe Bay. The North Slope is one of the most hostile environments on the planet. Flat, frozen tundra stretching to the horizon in every direction. Temperatures that drop to 50 below zero. Winds that can knock you off your feet. Darkness that lasts for months during the polar winter. We were equipped for it. Cold weather gear, communications equipment, snowmobiles, heated tents. Standard setup for Arctic exploration work. The screaming started on day 3. We were mapping a section of tundra about 2 miles from our base camp, using ground-penetrating radar to analyze the permafrost layers and identify potential drilling locations. The ground up there is permanently frozen, sometimes hundreds of feet deep, and you need to understand its composition before you can safely drill through it. I was walking a grid pattern with a portable radar unit when I stepped on a section of ground that screamed. Not a mechanical sound, not the crack of ice or the groan of shifting permafrost. A human scream, high-pitched, agonized, like someone in terrible pain. It came from directly beneath my boot, from somewhere in the frozen earth below me. I jumped back, my heart hammering, and looked down at the ground. It was just tundra, frozen soil covered with a thin layer of snow, identical to everything around it. No visible difference, no crack or opening that could explain the sound. I stood there, trying to convince myself I had imagined it, that the wind or the equipment had created an auditory illusion. Then I heard it again. Another scream, this time to my left. Then another behind me. Then more, all around me, a chorus of human voices shrieking from beneath the frozen ground. I could hear individual voices. Men, women, different pitches and tones, all screaming in agony or terror. The sound was muffled, like it was coming from deep underground, but it was unmistakable. I radioed back to the rest of the team, told them I was experiencing some kind of acoustic phenomenon and needed them to come verify what I was hearing. Within 15 minutes, all 6 of us were standing in that section of tundra, listening to the ground scream. It was not constant. The screams would surge when we walked across certain areas, then fade when we stood still. It was as if our footsteps were triggering them, our weight on the frozen ground causing whatever was down there to react. We tried to map it, marking the areas where the screaming was loudest, but there was no pattern we could identify. No geological feature that explained why this particular section of tundra would produce sounds that resembled human voices. Our team leader, a geologist named Martin Kowalski, theorized it was gas escaping from pockets in the permafrost. Methane or some other compound being released through tiny fissures, creating sounds as it moved through ice and rock. It was the only rational explanation we could come up with. But methane does not scream with different voices. It does not sound like people begging for help. We set up audio recording equipment and left it running overnight, then returned to base camp. None of us slept well. The sounds haunted us even when we were miles away, replaying in our minds. The next morning, We retrieved the recording equipment and played back what it had captured. 8 hours of screaming, continuous, overlapping voices crying out from beneath the frozen ground. And as we listened, we started to hear words. Not English, not any language we recognized, but structured sounds that had the cadence of speech. Like whatever was making those sounds was trying to communicate, trying to tell us something with the only voice it had available. We sent the recordings back to the company headquarters in Anchorage, along with our preliminary report. The response came back quickly. Continue the survey, document the phenomenon, but do not let it interfere with the work. The company had invested significant money in this exploration project, and strange sounds were not sufficient reason to abandon it. So we continued. Over the next week, we mapped nearly 20 square miles of the North Slope. And we found more screaming areas, dozens of them, scattered across the tundra like islands in a frozen sea. Each one produced the same terrifying chorus of human-like voices. Each one seemed to react to our presence, the screams intensifying when we walked across them, fading when we moved away. Martin developed a theory. He believed we were hearing echo signatures from ancient human populations. Thousands of years ago, indigenous peoples had lived and died on the North Slope. Perhaps their remains, frozen in the permafrost, were somehow creating acoustic effects. Sound trapped in ice, released when the ground was disturbed. It was far-fetched, but it was something we could put in a report that would not make us sound insane. Then we found the hole. It was on day 11, in one of the loudest screaming areas we had mapped. A circular opening in the tundra, about 3 feet in diameter, dropping straight down into darkness. The edges were smooth and regular, not like a natural formation. Someone or something had dug this hole, carved it through frozen ground that should have been impossible to excavate without heavy equipment. We dropped a weighted line down the hole. It went down 200 feet before hitting bottom. We lowered a camera on a cable, equipped with lights and a video feed. What we saw on the monitor made all of us go silent. The hole opened into a chamber, a large, roughly circular space carved out of the permafrost, the walls smooth and curved like the inside of a dome. And covering those walls, floor to ceiling, were figures, human shapes, but not quite human. Elongated limbs, heads too large for their bodies, fingers that were too long and had too many joints. They were frozen in the ice, preserved perfectly, their mouths open in silent screams. There were hundreds of them, maybe thousands, all frozen in positions of agony or terror, their bodies twisted and contorted, their faces locked in expressions of suffering. And as we watched the video feed, we realized the screaming sounds were coming from this chamber. The ground above it was conducting the sound upward, transmitting the voices through layers of frozen earth. But the figures in the ice were not making the sounds. They were dead, frozen for who knows how long. The screams were coming from deeper, from below the chamber, from something further down in the darkness beneath the permafrost. Martin made the decision to rappel down, against the protests of the rest of the team. He insisted we needed to document what was down there, needed to understand what we had found. 2 others volunteered to go with him. I stayed topside with the remaining 2 team members, managing the ropes and communications. We lowered them down one at a time. The video feed from their helmet cameras showed them descending through the hole, past walls of ice and frozen earth, until they reached the chamber. They stood among the frozen figures, their flashlight beams cutting through the darkness, illuminating the grotesque shapes trapped in the ice. Martin's voice came through the radio, describing what he was seeing. The figures were not human, he said. They were something else, something that resembled humans but had fundamental differences in their anatomy. He theorized they might be an evolutionary offshoot, a species that had diverged from the human line millions of years ago and had somehow survived in isolation in the Arctic. Or perhaps they were something that had never been human at all. Then they found the passage. At the far end of the chamber, barely visible in the ice, was another opening. A tunnel leading deeper into the frozen ground. And from that tunnel, the screaming was coming. Louder now, no longer muffled by layers of earth. Clear and sharp and filled with such anguish that even through the radio it made my skin crawl. I told them not to go down. Told them we had documented enough, that we needed to get them back to the surface and report this to the company. But Martin was not listening. He said he could see light down there. Faint bioluminescence coming from deep in the tunnel, like something alive was glowing in the darkness. He was going to investigate. The last thing I heard from him was a scream. Not from the ground, from Martin himself, his voice, distorted by terror and pain, cutting through the radio static. Then the feed went dead. All 3 helmet cameras, all 3 radio connections, dead simultaneously. We tried to pull them back up using the ropes, but there was no tension. The lines were slack, like they had been cut or released from below. We shouted down the hole, our voices echoing in the darkness, but there was no response. Just the screaming from the chamber, now mixed with 3 new voices that sounded sickeningly familiar. We waited for 6 hours, hoping they would reestablish contact, hoping they would emerge from the hole. But they never did. When we finally radioed for emergency extraction, when the helicopters came and pulled us off that frozen wasteland, we left those 3 men down there in the darkness. The company sealed the hole with concrete, marked the area as unstable, and forbade any future exploration in that region. The official report said they died in an equipment malfunction during a routine survey. There was no mention of the hole, no mention of the chamber or the frozen figures or the screaming ground. The audio recordings we sent back to Anchorage disappeared. Our documentation was classified and locked away. We were paid generous severance packages and strongly encouraged to never discuss what we had found. 2 members of the team killed themselves within a year. The 3rd developed early onset dementia and died in a care facility, babbling about things beneath the ice. I am the only one left who remembers what really happened out there on the North Slope. And I still hear them, not just in my nightmares, but in the real world. When it is very cold and very quiet, when the ground is frozen and the air is still, I can hear faint screaming coming from beneath my feet. It does not matter where I am, Colorado, California, Florida. The screams follow me, transmitted through the earth from that chamber in the Arctic, from whatever is down there in the darkness beneath the permafrost. Because I know now what those frozen figures were. They were not an ancient species. They were warnings, people who had gone down into that darkness and had been changed, transformed into something that was not quite human anymore, then frozen in ice as a warning to anyone who came after. Do not go deeper. Do not disturb what lives in the spaces beneath the frozen ground. But we did, and Martin and the others paid the price. They are down there now, adding their voices to the chorus, screaming from beneath the ice for eternity. And sometimes, late at night, I wonder if I am next. If the ground beneath my house will open up and pull me down into that darkness, down to where the screaming comes from, down to where something ancient and hungry waits in the frozen deep, listening for footsteps above, waiting for someone else to walk across the screaming ground. Story 4. Shadows that stayed. The shadows stayed behind when the people vanished. That's the part nobody can explain. 3 tourists standing on the Homer Spit in bright afternoon sunlight, and then they were just gone. Blinked out of existence like someone had cut them from reality with scissors. But their shadows remained, dark silhouettes cast on the weathered planks, perfect outlines of 3 human forms, frozen in the positions they'd been standing. And those shadows didn't move, didn't fade, just stayed there for 7 hours while the sun crossed the sky and everyone watched and tried to understand what the hell had just happened. My name is Patrick Donovan. I am a construction foreman from Wasilla, Alaska. I was on the Homer Spit that day in August of 1999. I saw it happen. I saw 3 people cease to exist. And one of the few who stayed long enough to see what came next. What walked out of those shadows when the sun finally set? What wore human skin but moved wrong? What looked at the crowd with eyes that had forgotten how to blink? This is the truth. All of it. And I am telling it because the tourist season is starting again and people need to know that the Homer Spit ISN safe has never been safe. That something lives in that narrow strip of land jutting into Kachemak Bay. Something that takes people. Something that leaves shadows behind. Something that comes back wearing faces it has no right to wear. The spit is 4.5 miles long. A narrow gravel bar that extends into the bay like a finger pointing at nothing. It's south the longest road into ocean waters in the entire world. Fishing boats dock there. Tourists come for the halibut charters and the gift shops. The views are incredible. Mountains rising across the bay. Eagles overhead. Water so clear you can see the bottom 20 feet down. It's beautiful in that raw Alaska way that makes people from the lower 48 forget that beauty and danger are often the same thing. I was there on a Tuesday afternoon. Midweek. Not too crowded. I'd driven down from Wasilla to pick up some specialized lumber from a supplier on the Spit. The day was perfect. 72 degrees. No wind. The kind of day that makes you forget Alaska has winter. I parked near the small boat harbor and walked along the boardwalk toward the supplier, this warehouse. That's when I first noticed them. 3 tourists. 2 women and a man. Probably in their 30s. They were standing at the railing looking out at the water, taking pictures, pointing at something in the bay. Normal tourist behavior. Nothing unusual. Nothing that would make you look twice. Except for one thing. The shadows they cast seemed darker than they should have been. Sharper, more defined. I remember noticing it and thinking it was weird how crisp the edges were. How the shadows looked almost painted onto the wooden planks. But it was bright sun, mid-afternoon. Of course the shadows would be distinct. I dismissed it, kept walking, had work to do, lumber to pick up. I was inside the warehouse for maybe 20 minutes. When I came out, pushing a dolly loaded with pine boards, there was a crowd gathering near the railing. Maybe 30 people, all staring at the same spot. All with this expression of confused horror. That look people get when their brain is trying to process something impossible. When reality has malfunctioned and they waiting for it to start making sense again. I left the dolly and walked over, asked someone what was happening. An older woman turned to me with tears running down her face. She pointed at the planks near the railing, at 3 shadows, human-shaped shadows, dark and crisp and detailed. And she told me that people had been standing there. 3 tourists. She'd been watching them. They were taking pictures. And then they were just gone. Not walked away, not fallen over the rail. Just gone, vanished, erased. But their shadows remained, stayed behind like stains, like burns in the wood. I looked around, looked for any sign of the 3 people, any explanation. There was none. The railing was intact. The water below was clear and empty. No bodies floating, no boats nearby, no place they could have gone in the split second they disappeared. And the shadows, God, the shadows, they were so detailed. I could see the outline of the man, this baseball cap. The shape of one woman, this ponytail. The other woman, this raised hand, frozen mid-wave. Every detail preserved in shadow form, cast by people who no longer existed. Someone had already called the police. Within minutes, Alaska State Troopers arrived. Then local police. Then the Coast Guard. They evacuated the immediate area. Set up a perimeter around the shadows. Treated it like a crime scene. But what crime could they investigate? People dawn to vanish in daylight. Dawn to leave perfect shadows behind. This wasn't the missing persons case. This was something else entirely. Something none of them had training for. Something that made even the most experienced officers look shaken and uncertain. The sun kept moving. Hours passed, and the shadows didn't change. They should have. Basic physics. The sun, its angle changes, shadows shift and lengthen and eventually disappear. But these didn't. They stayed in the exact same position. Same size, same darkness, like they'd been separated from the normal rules of light and time. Like they existed independent of the sun that had cast them. Scientists came. A physics professor from the university in Anchorage. Some federal investigators I didn't recognize. They took measurements, photographs, samples of the wood beneath the shadows. And I could see on their faces that they had no explanation. No theory that made sense. The shadows were impossible, but they were there, visible, undeniable. A glitch in reality that everyone could see but nobody could explain. I should have left, should have gotten my lumber and driven back to Wasilla and tried to forget what I'd seen. But I couldn't. I was mesmerized, horrified but unable to look away. So I stayed, stood with the growing crowd of onlookers while the authorities worked and the shadows remained and the afternoon turned to evening turned to dusk. That is when people started feeling it. A cold that didn't match the temperature. A pressure in the air like a storm approaching. But the sky was clear. And a sound, so low it was almost inaudible. A vibration that came up through the planks, through your feet, into your bones, like something massive was breathing beneath the spit. Something waking up, something getting ready to move. The police started pushing people back, clearing the boardwalk. The scientists packed up their equipment faster than seemed professional. The federal investigators exchanged looks that said they knew something. Something they weren't sharing. Something that made them want to be anywhere but near those shadows when the sun went down. Most people left, headed to their cars, drove away quickly, glad to distance themselves from whatever was happening. But I stayed, along with maybe a dozen others. Curiosity, stupidity, the human compulsion to witness. To see how the story ends even when every instinct screams to run. We stood at the edge of the perimeter, watching as sunset approached, watching as the natural shadows of the world began to lengthen and merge and blend into darkness. Watching to see what would happen to the 3 impossible shadows when night finally came. The sun touched the horizon, orange light spreading across the bay, and the shadows began to move, not shift with the changing light, move independently. The fingers on the frozen hand flexed. The ponytail swayed as if in a breeze that didn't exist. The baseball cap tilted slightly, and the darkness of the shadows deepened, became blacker than black, became voids in the shape of people, became holes in the world that you could feel pulling at you even from a distance, pulling at your attention, your warmth, your substance, like they were hungry, like they wanted to be filled, like they were doorways and something on the other side was trying to push through. Then they stood up. The shadows peeled themselves off the planks, rose into 3 dimensions, became silhouettes standing where the tourists had stood, perfectly human-shaped but wrong in every way that matters. Too still, too solid, too dark. They turned in unison, looked toward the crowd, looked at us with faces that were holes, with eyes that were absences, with mouths that opened in expressions that might have been smiles but felt like screams. People ran then, finally broke through the paralysis and ran. I heard someone sobbing, heard footsteps pounding on the planks, heard car doors slamming and engines starting and tires on gravel. The sound of mass panic, the sound of witnesses fleeing something they knew they shouldn't have seen, something that violated fundamental laws about what is real and what is possible. I couldn't to move, couldn't to look away. The shadow people stood there, watching the crowd scatter. And then they walked, took steps, moved down the boardwalk toward the parking area. Their movement was smooth but wrong, like they were gliding slightly above the surface, like they were animations created by someone who had never actually seen a human walk. And wherever they stepped, they left footprints. Not indentations, not marks, footprints made of deeper darkness. Shadows within shadows, stains that looked burned into the wood. The police didn't know what to do. I could see them at their perimeter, could see them backing away, hands on weapons they didn't draw because what would be the point? How do you shoot a shadow? How do you arrest darkness? They radioed for backup, for guidance, for someone to tell them protocol for this situation. But there is no protocol. There is no training for when reality breaks, when the rules stop applying, when something from nowhere walks into town wearing the shape of missing people. The shadow people reached the parking area, stopped near a rental car, a Honda sedan with California plates, and one of them, the one that had been the man with the baseball cap, reached out and touched the car door. The metal frosted instantly, ice spreading from the point of contact. The window cracked, the door sagged on its hinges like it had aged 50 years in 5 seconds. Like the shadow had drained something fundamental from it, had taken the energy, the life, the realness, and left only decay. Then they changed. The shadows filled in. Color seeped into them like watching a black and white photo slowly turn into color. Features emerged. Hair, clothing, skin tone, and within maybe 30 seconds, 3 normal-looking people stood in the parking lot. The same 3 tourists who vanished hours earlier. Same clothes, same faces, same everything. They looked around with expressions of confusion, looked at their hands like they couldn't quite remember what hands were for. And then one of them spoke, asked what had happened, asked where they were, asked why everyone was staring. The authorities moved in carefully, treated them like victims, like people who had been through trauma, wrapped them in emergency blankets, asked gentle questions, tried to assess their condition. And the 3 tourists seemed genuinely confused, said they didn't remember anything after looking at the water, said there had been something in the bay, something that caught their attention, something beautiful and terrible, and then nothing, just blank time, just a gap where hours should have been. They were taken to the hospital in Homer, examined thoroughly, and the doctors found nothing wrong. No injuries, no signs of trauma, vitals all normal, just 3 healthy people who apparently lost several hours and couldn't explain how. The story made local news, some coverage in Anchorage, then it faded, became another weird Alaska story, another unexplained event that people talked about for a while and then forgot because life goes on and mystery's done to pay the bills. But I didn't forget, couldn't forget, because I seen the shadows stand up, seen them walk, seen them drain life from metal and wood, seen them transform into people. And I knew what the authorities knew but wouldn't say. Those weren't the real tourists. The real tourists were gone, taken, erased. What came back were copies, imitations, things wearing stolen faces, things that had learned to mimic human form but hadn't quite mastered human behavior. I started following the story, tracking the 3 tourists. It wasn't hard. Small state, limited population. The man went back to California after a week. The 2 women stayed in Alaska, got jobs, rented apartments, started lives, and everything they did was almost right but not quite. The man never blinked. Security footage from the airport showed him staring straight ahead for 40 minutes without closing his eyes once. One woman never cast a shadow. You could see her clearly in photos, see her reflection in mirrors, but in bright sunlight, no shadow. Like she'd given hers away and never got it back. The other woman never spoke above a whisper, never raised her voice, never laughed or cried or showed any extreme emotion. Just existed in this flat, muted way that made people uncomfortable without knowing why. I reached out to one of them, the woman with no shadow, found her contact information and sent an email asking to talk. She agreed. We met at a coffee shop in Anchorage, and the moment I saw her up close, I knew for certain. Her eyes moved too slowly when tracking motion. Her breathing was too regular, too measured, like she'd learned that humans breathe but hadn't quite mastered the rhythm. And when I asked her about the spit, about what happened that day, she smiled. This careful, practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. And she told me she didn't. Do you remember? Told me there was just the gap. Just the nothing between looking at the water and being in the parking lot surrounded by police. But then she leaned forward, lowered her voice, and she told me something that made my blood freeze. She said sometimes she dreams about being in the dark, about being flat and empty and stretched across wood, about watching the world from ground level, about waiting for the sun to set, about being hungry, so hungry, about wanting to fill the emptiness inside her, about seeing people walk above her and wanting to pull them down. Pull them into the dark, pull them into the flat place where she used to live before she learned to stand up. Before she learned to pretend to be human. She stopped then, blinked slowly, that smile still on her face, and she asked if I'd like to go to Homer with her sometime. Said she'd been back to the spit since that day. Said maybe it would help her remember, help her understand what happened, help her become more complete. And the way she said complete, the emphasis, the longing, it was clear she meant it literally. That she was incomplete, that she was partial, that she was a shadow that had learned to fake substance but was still hungry for the real thing. I left, made an excuse and walked out. Never contacted her again, never went back to Homer, never walked on the spit, because I understood then what lives there, what waits in that strip of land reaching into the bay. Something old, something that exists between dimensions, something that casts shadows up into our world. And occasionally, when the conditions are right, when the light hits just wrong, those shadows can grab hold, can snatch people, can pull them down into the flat dark place, can take their substance, their reality, their lives, and then learn to wear those lives like costumes. Learn to walk and talk and pretend to be human while still being fundamentally empty. Fundamentally hungry, fundamentally wrong. The Homer spit is still there, still beautiful, still full of tourists every summer. And I watch the news every season. Watch for reports of people vanishing. Watch for shadows that don't to behave right. Watch for people who come back wrong. And it happens. Not every year, not even every few years. But often enough, a couple disappears during a romantic walk. A solo traveler never returns to his hotel. A family of 4 is seen 1 minute and gone the next. And the authorities investigate, find nothing, close the cases, call them accidents or misadventures or unexplained disappearances. Because what else can they do? How do you warn people that shadows are alive? That the ground beneath your feet might be hungry? That on the Homer spit, reality is thinner than it should be. That things from the dark places can reach through, can steal your substance and learn to wear your face. If you go to Alaska, if you visit Homer, if you walk the spit on a sunny afternoon, pay attention to your shadow. Watch how it behaves. And if it moves wrong, if it is darker than it should be, if it seems to have weight and substance it shouldn't, depossess, leave. Get off the spit. Get back to solid ground where shadows are just shadows, where darkness is just the absence of light, where you can walk without worrying that the ground beneath you might open up, might pull you down, might take everything you are and leave behind only a copy, only an imitation, only something that looks like you but dreams of being flat and empty and waiting on wooden planks for the sun to set so it can finally stand up and learn to walk and hunt and feed. The shadows that stayed behind that day in 1999 weren't an anomaly. They were a warning. A crack in the facade, a glimpse of what has always been there, what is always waiting, and what walks among us now, wearing stolen faces, carrying stolen names, living stolen lives. Empty things pretending to be full, dark things pretending to be light, shadows pretending to be people. And nobody knows, nobody sees, nobody suspects that the person next to them might not be real. Might be a copy, Might be something that came up from the flat dark place and learned to stand and smile and say all the right words while dreaming of pulling you down, of taking your substance, of adding your life to the collection of stolen realities that feed whatever waits beneath the Homer spit. Patient and hungry and forever reaching up toward the light. If you're still listening, thank you. Midnight Whispers lives on your subscriptions and your stories. So hit subscribe, ring the bell, and tell us where you're watching from. Alaska's dark has a way of finding people, even far away. Story 5, Thinking Fog. The ice fog in Nenana, Alaska doesn't just surround you, it studies you. And by the time I realized what it wanted, it was already too late to run. My name is Marcus Webb. I am a meteorologist. Spent 15 years studying Arctic weather patterns for the National Weather Service. I thought I understood fog. Thought I knew every variation, every formation, every scientific explanation for how water vapor behaves in extreme cold. I was wrong about all of it. I arrived in Nenana on January 8, 2024. Population 350. Tiny village on the Nenana River. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone and outsiders are noticed immediately. I was there to study ice fog formation, winter temperature inversions, standard research. Should have been a 2-week assignment collecting data and taking measurements. I lasted 4 days before I understood why the previous researcher had quit without explanation. Ice fog is common in interior Alaska. When temperatures drop below -40, moisture in the air freezes instantly. Creates a thick fog made of suspended ice crystals instead of water droplets. Reduces visibility to near zero. Makes driving dangerous. Makes everything dangerous. But Nenana, this fog was different. The locals tried to warn me. Told me to stay inside after dark. Told me not to go out alone when the fog rolled in. Told me the fog remembered faces. I dismissed it as superstition. Small-town folklore. The kind of stories isolated communities create to explain natural phenomena they don't understand. The first night, I set up monitoring equipment near the river. Temperature sensors, humidity gauges, cameras to capture fog formation in real time. Standard procedure. I've done it dozens of times in other locations. The fog came in around 9 p.m. Temperature was -43. Perfect conditions. The fog formed fast, thick, white, so dense I could barely see my own feet. Ice crystals glittered in my headlamp beam like microscopic diamonds. I was checking my equipment when I noticed the shape. At first, I thought it was another person. Someone standing maybe 30 feet away. Just a silhouette in the fog. Motionless, watching me. I called out, asked if they needed help. Asked if they were lost. No response. The figure just stood there. Perfectly still. Not even the slight movement of breathing. Just absolute stillness. I walked toward it. The fog was so thick I had to move carefully. Each step deliberate. Watching for obstacles. For ice. For anything solid. The figure moved. Not walked. Just shifted position. One moment it was ahead of me. The next moment it was to my left. Then behind me. Moving without transition. Without sound. Just appearing in different locations like it was teleporting through the fog. My heart started racing. I spun around. Tried to keep track of it. But the fog was too thick. Too disorienting. And the figure kept moving. Kept repositioning. Always just at the edge of visibility. Always watching. I ran back to my truck. Started the engine. Turned the heat on full blast. Sat there shaking while the defroster cleared ice from the windshield. Through the clearing glass, I could see shapes in the fog. Multiple figures now. 5, 10, 20. All standing in a loose circle around my vehicle. All perfectly still. All facing toward me. I drove back to my rental cabin. Didn't stop. Didn't slow down. Just focused on the road and tried not to look at the shapes that seemed to follow in my peripheral vision. Moving through the fog, keeping pace with my truck. Watching. The next morning, I checked my cameras. Reviewed the footage from the night before. The video showed the fog rolling in. Showed me working. Showed me suddenly running. But it didn't show any figures. Just fog. Dense. Uniform. Empty. But there was something wrong with the fog itself. Frame-by-frame analysis showed patterns. Structures. The ice crystals weren't randomly distributed. They were organized, forming geometric shapes, creating networks that looked almost intentional. Almost designed. I showed the footage to my landlord. Woman in her 60s named Ruth. She lived in Nenana her whole life. She watched in silence. Then asked if the fog had followed me home. Asked if I'd seen it at my windows during the night. I told her no. Told her I slept fine. But I was lying, because I had heard something. Soft sounds, like fingers tapping on glass. Like someone trying to get my attention. I convinced myself it was ice forming. Branches scraping. anything normal. Ruth told me about the fog, its history, how it had always been strange in Nenana, how the old-timers talked about it like it was alive, how people who stayed out too long sometimes came back different, quieter, distant, like part of them had been left behind in the fog. She told me about Tommy Hendricks, teenager who walked home through the fog 3 years ago, made it to his front door. His parents watched him approach through the window, watched him reach for the doorknob. Then the fog thickened, and when it cleared, Tommy was gone, just vanished, door still locked, no footprints leading away, just empty space where their son had been standing. They found him 2 days later, 3 miles from town, sitting in the snow, alive but hypothermic. He couldn't remember what happened, couldn't remember those 2 days. Just knew he'd been somewhere cold, somewhere that watched him. He moved away 6 months later, couldn't stand being in Nenana anymore. Said the fog still called to him, still wanted him back. I listened to Ruth's story, took notes, remained professionally skeptical, but that night, I stayed inside, kept the curtains closed, tried not to think about shapes in the fog. The second night, the fog came to my windows. I was reviewing data when I heard the tapping, soft, rhythmic, multiple points around the cabin, like someone was testing each window, checking for access, looking for weakness. I looked outside, pressed my face against the glass. The fog was right there, inches away, so thick it looked solid. And in that thickness, I saw faces, dozens of them, formed from ice crystals and freezing air. Faces that looked human but weren't quite right. Proportions slightly off, features too symmetric, eyes too aware. They were studying me. I could feel it, could see it in how the faces shifted and changed, like they were trying different configurations, testing what looked most human, what would be most effective. One face moved closer, pressed against the window from the outside. I could see individual ice crystals forming its features, could see them reorganizing, restructuring, creating detail that shouldn't be possible in frozen water vapor. The face smiled, and I knew, absolutely knew, that smile wasn't too random, wasn't coincidental. The fog had learned what a smile was, had studied humans long enough to understand facial expressions, to mimic them, to use them. I backed away from the window. The faces followed, moving from window to window, tracking my movement through the cabin, always watching, always learning. My phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. Static, heavy breathing, then a voice. My voice, speaking words I said earlier that day. Played back to me, but the cadence was wrong. The inflection was off, like something was practicing, learning to sound like me. The call ended. The tapping stopped. The faces in the fog dispersed. I was alone in my cabin, but I knew they were still out there, still watching, still waiting. The third night, I made a mistake. I went outside. My equipment was still at the river. Expensive instruments, sensitive data. I couldn't just abandon them. I convinced myself the fog was just weather, just ice crystals, just natural phenomena with some unusual properties. I was lying to myself, but I needed that lie, needed the rational explanation, needed science to make sense of something that didn't make sense. The fog was thick when I reached the river. Temperature had dropped to -52, the coldest night of the year. Perfect conditions for ice fog, perfect conditions for whatever the fog really was. My equipment was covered in frost. I started disconnecting sensors, packing gear, working as fast as I could with numb fingers and clouded breath. That's when I realized I wasn't alone. The figures were back, more of them this time, surrounding me in a tight circle, close enough to touch, close enough that I should have been able to see them clearly despite the fog. But they stayed just blurred enough, just indistinct enough, maintaining that perfect distance where they were visible but not quite definable, where they existed but couldn't be confirmed. They started moving, circling me, slow rotation, clockwise. The fog itself seemed to move with them, seemed to flow around them, seemed to be part of them. And I heard sounds, not voices, not words, just patterns, frequencies, like the fog was trying to communicate, trying to convey something my brain wasn't equipped to understand. The patterns got more complex, more insistent. I felt pressure in my head, behind my eyes, like something was pushing, trying to get in, trying to access my thoughts, my memories, my understanding of what it meant to be human. I dropped my equipment, started running. The figures followed, not chasing exactly, just maintaining proximity, keeping pace. The fog moved with them, moved through them, moved as them. I made it maybe 50 yards before I fell, slipped on ice, went down hard, felt my ankle twist, sharp pain, couldn't put weight on it, couldn't run. The figures closed in, surrounded me completely. The fog got thicker, so thick I couldn't see my own hands. Couldn't see anything except shapes in the white. Shapes that were becoming more defined, more solid, more real. I felt cold that went beyond temperature. Cold that felt cognitive, intentional, like the fog was examining me, reading me, understanding what I was made of, what made me function, what made me human. And I felt something else, something being taken. Not physical, not measurable, but essential, like the fog was extracting information directly from my consciousness, downloading my humanity, learning what it meant to be Marcus Webb. I must have passed out. When I woke up, I was in the hospital in Fairbanks. Severe hypothermia, frostbite on 3 fingers, concussion from the fall. They said a truck driver had found me on the highway, 5 miles from where I'd been at the river. I had no memory of traveling that distance, no memory of reaching the road, just blank space where hours should have been. The doctors ran tests, brain scans, blood work. Everything came back normal. Physically, I was fine. But I knew something was wrong. Something had changed. Something was different. I started noticing patterns I'd never seen before. In weather, in data, in the behavior of water vapor and ice crystals. Patterns that were too organized, too deliberate, too intelligent. The fog wasn't just fog. It was something else. Something that existed in the spaces between ice crystals. Something that used frozen water vapor as a medium, as a body, as a way to interact with our world. And it was spreading. I started seeing reports from other locations, other towns in interior Alaska, other places where ice fog was common. People reporting figures, faces, intelligence in the fog, all the same patterns, all the same behavior. But Nenana was the center, the origin point, the place where it was strongest, where it had been learning longest, where it understood humans best. I tried to warn people, tried to share my research, tried to explain what I discovered. But nobody believed me, told me it was trauma, hypothermia-induced hallucination, post-traumatic stress, anything except the truth. I am back in Seattle now, safe, warm, far from Nenana. But I still see the patterns, still notice the intelligence, still feel like I am being watched. Because last night, we had fog, regular fog, water droplets, nothing frozen, nothing that should be connected to what I experienced in Alaska. But I saw faces in it, saw shapes, saw something studying me through my window, learning, adapting, spreading. The ice fog of Nenana wasn't confined to ice anymore. Wasn't confined to extreme cold. It had learned enough, had gathered enough information, had understood enough about our world to exist in other forms, other temperatures, other places. And it remembered me, remembered my face, my patterns, my humanity that it had sampled. It knew me now, could find me anywhere, could reach me through any fog, any mist, any suspended water vapor that could serve as its body. I am writing this as a warning. If you see fog that moves wrong, that forms shapes, that seems to watch you, Don, to go outside, Don, to let it study you, Don, to give it the chance to learn what you are. Because once it knows you, it never forgets. Once it learns your patterns, it can find you anywhere. Once it understands your humanity, it can take it, can copy it, can become it. The fog is getting thicker outside my window. The faces are getting clearer, and I can hear tapping. Soft, rhythmic, patient. It followed me home, all the way from Nenana, all the way across 1,000 miles. Because it is not bound by distance anymore. Not bound by temperature. Not bound by anything except the presence of fog. And there, it's always fog somewhere. Always mist. Always suspended water vapor waiting to become a body. Waiting to become eyes. Waiting to become the thing that learned to think in the frozen air of Nenana, Alaska. The tapping is getting louder. The faces are pressing closer, and I can see my own face among them now. Formed from fog, smiling back at me. Perfect copy, perfect mimicry. The fog learned well, learned everything it needed, and now it is ready to become us, to replace us. One face at a time, one person at a time, one town at a time. Starting with the man who taught it best, the man who stayed long enough, who let it study him, who showed it what humanity looked like from the inside. The window is opening. I didn't unlock it, didn't touch it, but it is opening anyway, and the fog is coming in, bringing my face with it, bringing the cold, bringing the intelligence that learned to think in ice crystals and freezing air. I'm sorry I went to Nenana. Sorry I studied the fog. Sorry I gave it the chance to learn, to understand, to spread. But mostly, I'm sorry for whoever finds this, because if you rereading it, the fog has already spread far enough to reach you too. And now you remarked, known, studied. It is always learning, always watching, always waiting in the next fog, the next mist, the next moment when water vapor hangs suspended in the air and something that I ascend to quite alive thinks it's frozen thoughts. Welcome to its classroom. Class is always in session, and the fog never stops learning. Story 6. Preacher. This last sermon, the screaming started before I even entered the mine, and that should have been enough to make me turn back. My name is David Harmon. I am a documentary filmmaker from Portland, and 3 weeks ago I drove to the abandoned Kennecott copper mines in Alaska to shoot footage for a project about ghost towns. I thought I was chasing local folklore. Atmospheric shots, maybe some creepy ambiance for the edit. I had no idea I was walking into something that was still hunting me. The Kennecott mines shut down in 1938. The whole operation just stopped overnight. Workers left their tools, left their belongings. The company packed up the valuable equipment and abandoned everything else to the Alaska wilderness. Now it is a historical site. Rusty buildings clinging to the mountainside. Empty dormitories. A massive mill that looks like it could collapse any second. And the mine shafts. Dark tunnels burrowed deep into the mountain. Most are sealed off. Too dangerous. But some are still accessible if you know where to look and don't mind ignoring the warning signs. I read about the preacher. Local legend. Back in 1929, a traveling minister named Reverend Thomas Blackwell came to Kennecott. Stayed for 3 months, held services for the miners. Then one day he went into shaft number 7 and didn't come out. They found him a week later, deep in the tunnels, on his knees, hands clasped in prayer, dead from exposure and dehydration. His fingers were worn bloody from clutching his Bible. His throat was raw from screaming. The part that made it legend instead of just tragedy was what happened after. People started hearing him, his voice echoing up from the shafts, praying, shouting scripture, begging something to leave him alone. But here is the thing that makes your skin crawl. The voice comes from multiple locations at the same time. Different shafts, different levels, like he's everywhere in the mountain at once. Or like whatever he was fighting can move through the tunnels faster than sound can travel. I reached Kennecott on October 9th, late season. Most tourists were gone. The site caretaker told me I could film the exterior buildings but stay out of the mines. I nodded, thanked him, waited for him to drive away. Then I grabbed my camera and headed for shaft 7. The entrance was boarded up but not well. I pulled away enough planks to squeeze through, turned on my headlamp. The beam cut through darkness that felt thick, physical, like it was pushing back against the light. The air smelled like rust and stone and something else, something organic and rotten. I chalked it up to dead animals. Bats, whatever. I've filmed in plenty of abandoned places. They all smell like decay. I moved deeper. The tunnel sloped downward. My footsteps echoed weird, too long, like the sound was traveling farther than it should before bouncing back. That's when I heard the first prayer. Faint, distant, a man, his voice reciting the Lord. This prayer. The words were rushed, desperate, like someone trying to remember the lines while something terrible closed in. I stopped walking, held my breath, tried to pinpoint the direction. The voice was coming from ahead of me, deeper in the shaft. I told myself it was wind. Acoustic tricks, the mountain settling, anything rational, but my hands were shaking as I raised the camera and hit record. The prayer stopped mid-sentence. Silence rushed back in, heavier than before. I waited, counted to 30. Nothing. I should have left. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around. But I am a filmmaker. This was exactly the kind of footage I came for. Atmospheric audio, mysterious sounds, gold for a documentary. I moved forward. The tunnel branched, 2 paths splitting into darkness. I chose left, followed it for maybe 50 yards. The walls were closer here. I could touch both sides if I stretched out my arms. Support beams crossed overhead, old wood, rotting. One sneeze could probably bring the whole thing down. The prayer started again. Behind me this time, I spun around. My headlamp beam swept the empty tunnel. Nothing there, just rock and shadows and my own footprints in the dust. But the voice was clear. Right behind me, close enough that I should have felt breath on my neck. The words were different now. Not the Lord. His prayer. Something else. Latin, maybe? Or a language I didn't recognize. But the tone was unmistakable. Desperation. Terror. The sound of a man fighting something he couldn't win against. I ran. Didn't look back. Just sprinted toward the entrance. My headlamp beam bounced wildly. Shadows jumped and twisted. The tunnel seemed longer than before. Like it was stretching, growing. The voice followed. Not behind me anymore. All around me. Coming from the walls themselves. Multiple voices now. All the same man. All praying in that frantic, broken way. I burst out of the shaft into afternoon sunlight. Fell to my knees, gasped for air that didn't smell like death and stone. My camera was still recording. I should have deleted the footage. Should have packed up and left. Instead, I went back to my rental cabin and watched what I captured. The audio was clear, too clear. You could hear every word of those prayers. Could hear the raw fear in the preacher's voice. But there was something else underneath. A sound I hadn't noticed in the moment. Breathing, heavy, wet, coming from everywhere. The preacher's voice wasn't like something was circling him, stalking, waiting for gaps in his prayers to strike. And then, right before I ran, there was a new sound. Laughter. Not the preacher. Something else. Deep and wrong and delighted. I played that section back a dozen times. Enhanced the audio. Isolated the frequencies. The laughter wasn't coming from one source. It was layered. The same laugh repeated at slightly different intervals. Like an echo, but echoes done to laugh before the original sound finishes. I uploaded the footage to my laptop. Started editing. Told myself I was being professional. Documenting something interesting. But really, I was obsessed. Couldn't stop listening to those prayers. That breathing, that laughter. I fell asleep at my desk around 2 a.m. I woke up to my laptop screen glowing in the darkness. The video was playing, but I hadn't pressed play. The timestamp showed it had been running for 3 hours. Just looping, the same section over and over. The part with the laughter. I reached for the keyboard to stop it. The laughter came from behind me. Not from the laptop speakers. From the cabin itself. The same layered, echoing quality. Coming from multiple directions. The kitchen, the bathroom, the closet. I grabbed my keys and ran. Didn't shut down my laptop. Just got in my car and drove. Made it 20 miles before I had to pull over. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I sat on the shoulder of the Richardson Highway, watching the sun come up, trying to convince myself I imagined it. My phone rang. Unknown number. I answered without thinking. Static. Heavy breathing. Then that voice. The preacher's voice. Not praying this time. Whispering. Begging. He told me to go back. Said he made a mistake. Said the prayers weren't to protect him from the demon. They were to keep it contained. To keep it in the mountain. He said when he died, his voice became part of the mountain. Part of the prison. Still praying. Still fighting. Keeping the thing trapped in the dark where it belonged. He said I brought out a recording of its laughter. Brought it into the light. Given it a way to spread beyond the stone and the shadows. He said I had to destroy the recording. Destroy every copy. Then go back to the mine and finish the prayer he started in 1929. The call ended. I checked my phone. The call log showed nothing. No unknown number. No 3-minute conversation. Just empty space where the call should have been. I drove back to the cabin. My laptop was gone. Doors still locked. No signs of break-in. Just gone. But I already backed up the footage to the cloud. To my desktop at home. To 3 different hard drives. The preacher was right. I spread it. That night, I started hearing the prayers in my house in Portland. Started seeing shadows move wrong. Started finding my doors open when I knew I locked them. And the laughter. Always the laughter. Coming from rooms I wasn't in. From the walls. From the space behind my reflection in mirrors. I tried deleting the files. Every copy I could find. But the footage was already out there. I sent clips to colleagues for feedback. Posted a teaser on social media. The algorithm had already grabbed it. Already started pushing it to people who liked spooky content. Every view spread it further. Every share gave it more reach. More places to exist outside the mountain. I am driving back to Alaska now. Got the address of Shaft 7 burned into my brain. Got a printout of the prayers the preacher was reciting. Latin exorcism rites. Found them in a Catholic archive online. Do you know if I can finish what he started? Don, do you know if I can trap that thing back in the mountain? But I have to try. Because last night, the laughter changed. Got closer. More solid. And I saw something in my bedroom doorway. Just for a second. Just long enough to know it was real. Tall. Wrong proportions. Skin that looked like it was made of smoke and shadow. Eyes that reflected my headlamp beam back at me the same way they must have reflected the preacher, this lantern 90 years ago. It's not a demon. Not exactly. It's something older. Something that was in that mountain before the miners came. Before the preacher tried to fight it. Something that fed on the copper in the rock for centuries. Fed on the darkness. Fed on the men who died in those tunnels. The preacher, his prayers kept it contained. Turned his voice into chains. But chains need maintenance. Need someone to keep praying. Keep fighting. He has been doing it alone for almost a century. Am 3 hours from Kennecott now. Can see the mountains in the distance. My phone keeps ringing. Unknown numbers, static and breathing, and that desperate voice telling me to hurry. Telling me it is breaking free. Telling me other people are hearing it now. Other people who watched my video. Other people who let that laughter into their homes. I can hear it in my car now. In the engine noise. In the sound of tires on asphalt. That same layered laughter. Getting louder. Getting closer. The preacher, his prayers are playing on my radio. I didn't turn it on. Didn't tune to any station. It just started. All frequencies at once. His voice begging God to hold the line. To not let the darkness win. I am almost there. I don't know if I'll make it out. But if you hear prayers coming from nowhere, if you hear laughter that sounds like it is everywhere at once, if you see shadows moving like they re-alive, done to record it, done to share it, done to give it away out of wherever it has been contained. Some things are buried for a reason. Some prisons need to stay sealed. Some prayers are meant to be said forever. Story 7. Between the worlds, the graves were empty. All 12 of them, dug up carefully by archaeologists from the University of Alaska, documented with precision, opened with respect. And every single one was empty. No bones, no artifacts, no evidence that bodies had ever been there at all. Except for one thing. The soil inside each grave was warm. Not ambient temperature. Warm like something alive had been lying there. Warm like whatever had been buried centuries ago had only just gotten up and walked away. My name is David Reese. I am a cultural anthropologist from Fairbanks. I was part of the team that excavated those graves near Chena Hot Springs in the fall of 2003. I was there when we realized the bodies were gone. I was there when we found the footprints leading away from the burial site. And I was there 3 nights later when I saw what walks between worlds. What the Athabascan elders warned us about. What we should have left undisturbed. This is my confession, my warning, and my apology to the people whose rest we violated, to the boundary we crossed, to the balance we destroyed when we dug where we shouldn't have. When we opened doors that were meant to stay closed. Chena Hot Springs sits about 60 miles northeast of Fairbanks. Natural hot springs that bubble up from deep underground, heated by geothermal activity. The Athabascan people used the area for thousands of years, considered it sacred, a place where the barrier between our world and the spirit world was thin, where the living and the dead could almost touch, where careful respect was required because crossing that boundary, even accidentally, could have consequences. We found the burial site during a routine survey. Ground-penetrating radar showed 12 anomalies arranged in a perfect circle about a quarter mile from the main springs. The pattern was too regular to be natural, too deliberate. The university got permits, consulted with tribal representatives, got cautious approval to investigate as long as we followed protocols, as long as we treated the site with respect, as long as we reburied anything we found. But the tribal elder who came to bless the site looked worried. His name was Thomas Nicolai. He was in his 80s, had lived in the area his entire life. He performed the ceremony he requested, said the prayers, burned the sage, but before he left, he pulled me aside, told me his grandmother had stories about this place, about graves that weren't really graves, about people who were buried but not dead. Not exactly, about those who walk between worlds, existing in both places, visible to neither, waiting for someone to disturb the balance, to open the way fully, to let them return. I thanked him, took notes on what he said for cultural context, but I didn't really listen, didn't take it seriously. I was a scientist. I dealt in evidence and data and peer-reviewed research. Not legends, not ghost stories, not spiritual warnings from people whose worldview I respected academically but didn't share personally. That was my first mistake. My biggest mistake, the one that cost us everything. We started excavating in late September. The weather was already turning. Snow flurries in the morning. Ground starting to freeze. We had maybe 3 weeks before conditions would make work impossible. The team was 5 people. Me, 2 grad students named Sarah and Mike, a physical anthropologist named Dr. Chen, and a local guide named Robert who knew the terrain and could help with logistics. The first grave we opened was on the eastern edge of the circle. We removed soil carefully, layer by layer, documenting everything, recording depth and composition, looking for artifacts or remains. And we found nothing, just soil, normal forest soil. But 3 feet down, where the body should have been, the earth was warm. Noticeably warm, like a person had been lying there recently, like body heat had soaked into the ground and stayed. Dr. Chen took temperature readings. The soil at body depth was 87 degrees. The surrounding soil was 42 degrees. There was no explanation. No geothermal vent. No chemical reaction. No reason for that specific area to be warmer. But it was, undeniably, measurably, impossibly warm. We opened the second grave. Same result. Empty, warm soil at body depth. No remains. No artifacts. No explanation. By the fourth grave, we were all unsettled. This wasn't normal. Wasn't explainable by looting or erosion or any conventional archaeological phenomenon. These graves had never been disturbed. The soil layers were intact. The arrangement was undisturbed, but the bodies were gone, had always been gone, or had left in a way that didn't disturb the earth above them. Sarah wanted to stop, said we should consult with Thomas Nicolai again, ask what the story said about empty graves, about warm soil, about what happens when you dig in places where the barrier is thin. But we were scientists. We had permits and funding and academic pressure to produce results. So we kept going. Opened all 12 graves over the next week. All empty, all impossibly warm, all containing nothing but soil that held heat it shouldn't have. We took samples, sent them for analysis. The labs found nothing unusual. Just regular forest soil, slightly higher organic content in surrounding areas, slightly different mineral composition, but nothing that would explain the temperature. Nothing that would explain the absence of bodies. Nothing that made sense. Then Mike found the footprints. He was doing a perimeter survey, documenting the site layout, when he noticed depressions in the moss about 20 yards from the graves. Bare footprints, human-sized, leading away from the circle toward the forest. Fresh prints, or at least fresh-looking. Deep enough to be recent. Clear enough to show toe definition. But that was impossible. We had the site secured for a week. Nobody had been here barefoot. Nobody had walked away from the graves. Especially not recently. Not in late September in Alaska when the temperature at night dropped below freezing. We followed the tracks. They led into the forest in a straight line. Not following any path or game trail. Just straight through the undergrowth. Through areas where walking would be difficult. Where you did naturally go around obstacles. But these prints went straight. Like whatever made them didn't to notice terrain. Didn't to respond to the physical world the way living things do. Like it was walking through our reality but not entirely part of it. The tracks went on for maybe half a mile before they just stopped. Not at a road or stream or any logical endpoint. They just ended, mid-stride, like whatever made them had taken a step and landed somewhere else. Somewhere that wasn't here. Somewhere we couldn't follow. That night, back at our camp near the hot springs, I couldn't sleep. My tent faced the burial site. And around 2 a.m, I saw movement. Figures, 12 of them, standing in the clearing where the graves were. They were visible but not solid. More like suggestions of people, outlines that were slightly darker than the darkness around them. And they were looking at our camp, all 12 of them, standing perfectly still, watching us with attention that felt malevolent. That felt angry. That felt like judgment. I should have woken the others. Should have documented what I was seeing. But I was paralyzed, frozen by a fear that was older than reason, older than science. The fear that tells you when you are being hunted, when something dangerous has noticed you, when you have crossed a line you can uncross. The figures stood there for maybe 10 minutes. Then they turned in unison, walked back into the forest, moving in that same straight line, moving through trees without going around them, moving like they occupied different space than the physical world, like they were here but also somewhere else, between worlds, belonging fully to neither. In the morning, I told the team what I'd seen. Sarah believed me. Mike was skeptical but concerned. Dr. Chen dismissed it as sleep paralysis or stress-induced hallucination. Robert, our local guide, didn't say anything. Just started packing his gear, said he was leaving, said his contract didn't cover spiritual disturbances, said the Athabascan elders had warned against this exact situation and he wasn't staying to see how it ended. He was gone within an hour, drove back to Fairbanks and we never saw him again. We should have left with him. Should have packed up, filled in the graves, apologized to whatever we disturbed. But academic pride is a powerful thing. Dr. Chen convinced us to stay. Just 2 more days. Just enough time to finish documenting the site. Just enough time to collect final measurements and samples. 2 more days. What could happen in 2 more days? The second night, Sarah disappeared. She'd gone to use the bathroom around 11. Just walked 20 yards from camp to the designated area. We heard her scream, once, sharp and terrified. Then silence. Mike and I grabbed flashlights and ran. Found nothing. No Sarah. No signs of struggle. No tracks. Just her flashlight lying in the moss. Still on. still working, pointing back toward the graves. We searched all night, covered every inch of terrain within a mile radius, called her name until we were hoarse, called park rangers, called search and rescue. By dawn, we had helicopters and tracking dogs and 20 volunteers combing the forest. And they found nothing. Sarah had vanished as completely as the bodies from those graves, as completely as whatever had walked away centuries ago and left warm soil behind. The search continued for 3 days. I stayed at camp with Mike while Dr. Chen coordinated with authorities. And every night, I saw them, the 12 figures, standing at the edge of our camp, watching, getting closer each time. On the third night, they were within 15 feet, close enough that I could see details, close enough to realize they weren't ghosts or spirits or anything intangible. They were solid, real, physical, but wrong. Their proportions were slightly off, their movements too smooth, their features too symmetrical, like they were copies of humans made by something that had studied us but didn't quite understand what made us real. And they weren't alone anymore. There were 13 figures now. The new one was smaller, slighter, wearing clothes that looked familiar, wearing Sarah's jacket, wearing Sarah's face, but standing with the same unnatural stillness, the same wrong proportions, the same sense of being here but also somewhere else, between worlds, belonging to neither. On the fourth night, Mike didn't come back from his evening walk. Just went to check the perimeter, said he'd be 10 minutes. An hour passed, then 2. I went looking, found his boots near the graves, placed neatly side by side, empty, like he stepped out of them and kept walking barefoot into the forest, toward whatever waited in the place between worlds. I ran, didn't stop to pack, didn't stop to tell Dr. Chen. Just ran to my truck and drove back to Fairbanks doing 70 on roads that twisted and curved and should have killed me at that speed. And I didn't look back, didn't let myself think about what I was leaving behind. What I helped release, what was walking around now wearing the faces of my colleagues. The authorities found Mike's body 3 days later. He was standing at the burial site, perfectly upright, eyes open, not breathing, not decomposing, just standing there like a statue, like something had taken everything that made him alive and left only the shell. They took him to the hospital in Fairbanks, declared him dead despite having no cause of death, no injuries, no disease, no explanation for why a healthy 26-year-old man was suddenly a corpse standing upright with his eyes open and an expression of terror frozen on his face. They never found Sarah. The university closed the project, sealed all our documentation. Dr. Chen published a paper about geological anomalies affecting burial preservation. Never mentioned the warm soil. Never mentioned the footprints. Never mentioned anything that couldn't be explained by conventional science. And when I tried to object, when I tried to tell the truth, I was quietly encouraged to take a leave of absence, to get counseling, to understand that my career would be over if I continued making claims about walking dead and barriers between worlds. So I stopped talking, took a job teaching high school in Oregon, put as much distance as possible between myself and Alaska, between myself and those graves, between myself and the knowledge that we opened something we couldn't close, that we disturbed a balance that had held for centuries, that we let something through, or let something back, something that existed between worlds, that walked in both places, that took people and wore them, that added them to the collective of those who belonged nowhere, who were neither alive nor dead, neither here nor there, just between, forever between, but I can outrun it, because 3 months ago, I saw one of them, standing across the street from my apartment in Portland, wearing Sarah's face, wearing Sarah's jacket, standing with that unnatural stillness, that wrong proportion, that sense of being not quite real. And she was watching my window, just watching, not moving, not breathing, just there, between worlds, existing in both places, visible to me because I'd seen them before, because I opened the graves, because I was part of what happened, part of what let them through. She comes back sometimes, not often, maybe once a month, always at night, always watching from across the street. And each time, she is a little more solid, a little more here, a little less between, like the barrier is thinning, like what we started in those graves is continuing, like more of them are coming through, like the boundary is collapsing and soon there won't be a between anymore. Just here, just our world, shared with those who walk, those who exist in liminal space, those who were buried but not dead, sleeping but not alive, waiting for someone to dig them up, waiting for someone to break the balance, waiting to return. The Athabascan elders were right. The graves near Chena Hot Springs were never meant to be opened. The stories about those who walk between worlds weren't metaphor or superstition. They were warning. They were truth. They were knowledge passed down for generations, because some boundaries are meant to be respected. Some doors are meant to stay closed. Some places are sacred not because they were holy, but because they were dangerous. Because they hold something back. Because disturbing them has consequences that science can measure or explain or control. If you go to Chena Hot Springs, if you hike in the forests around the springs, if you find old burial sites or stone circles or places that feel wrong in ways you can explain, leave them alone. Don't dig, don't investigate, don't try to understand, because some things aren't meant to be understood. Some boundaries aren't meant to be crossed. Some knowledge isn't worth having. And those who walk between worlds are still there, still watching, still waiting for the next person who doesn't believe in boundaries, who doesn't respect warnings, who thinks science and permits and good intentions are enough to protect them from consequences that existed long before science. That will exist long after science forgets them. I see them more now. Not just Sarah, others, standing at bus stops, standing in crowds, standing in places where people gather and never quite belonging, never quite solid, never quite here, between worlds, between life and death, between then and now, and nobody else notices, nobody else sees them, because they haven to cross the boundary, haven to open the graves, haven to see what happens when you disturb the places where both worlds touch. But I have, and I can, to unsee it, can, to unknow it, can, to go back to believing the world is simple and explained and safe. Because it's not. It never was, and every day, more of them come through. More of them walk between. More of them wait for the barrier to thin just a little more until they can stop being between and start being here. Fully here, in our world, walking among us, wearing faces they've taken, living lives they've stolen, existing where they belong because we opened the door and invited them through, and now they've won. Go back because there's nothing to go back to. Because between is all they ever known. And now they relearning to be here, to be real, to be solid, to take what they need to exist fully in our world. Starting with us, the ones who saw them, the ones who know, the ones who opened the graves and broke the balance and let them through. We were the first, but we won to be the last, because the barrier is collapsing, the between is shrinking, and soon, very soon, everyone will see them. Everyone will know. Everyone will understand that we share this world with those who walk, those who wait, those who exist in the spaces we can see until it's too late. Until they standing across the street, watching your window, wearing a face you recognize, getting closer every night, getting more real, getting ready to take what they need to stop being between and start being here. With us, forever. Story 8, What We Forgot. 47 people in Wasilla, Alaska lost pieces of their childhoods in October 2006. And I'm the only one who knows why, because I'm the one who took them. My name is Dr. Sarah Mitchell. I am a neurologist, was a neurologist, before everything happened, before I discovered that human memory isn't stored where we think it is, before I learned that some things are better left forgotten. I moved to Wasilla in September 2006. Fresh from a research position in Seattle, bought a small practice, nothing fancy, just me and a receptionist seeing patients with migraines, seizures, the usual neurological complaints you find in any small Alaska town of 7,000 people. The practice came with equipment, an older MRI machine, EEG monitors, standard diagnostic tools, and one piece of experimental hardware the previous doctor had acquired but never used. A transcranial magnetic stimulation device, TMS, used for treating depression, for mapping brain function, for accessing neural pathways in ways we were only beginning to understand. The device had been modified. I noticed it immediately. Extra coils, unusual wiring, a custom computer interface that didn't match any standard TMS protocol. I should have been suspicious. Should have questioned why the previous doctor had left so abruptly. Why the practice sold for half its value. Why the locals seemed nervous when I mentioned where I set up shop. But I was excited, eager. This was my chance to do real research, to push boundaries, to understand how memory actually worked at a fundamental level. The first patient came in on October 3rd. Margaret Townsend, 62 years old, complaining of persistent headaches, localized to her left temporal lobe, right where long-term memories are processed. Standard stuff. I ran the usual tests. Everything came back normal. She mentioned something strange as she was leaving. said she. She'd been having trouble remembering her childhood. Specific events were just gone. Her 8th birthday, her first day of school, meeting her best friend, all erased. She could remember around them, could remember the context, but the actual memories were missing, like someone had surgically removed them from her brain. I told her it was probably stress, age-related memory loss. Nothing to worry about, but something bothered me. The specificity, the precision. Memory loss doesn't usually work that way. Doesn't target specific events while leaving everything else intact. That night, I examined the modified TMS device more carefully. Found notes hidden in the computer files, research logs from the previous doctor, Dr. James Reeves. He'd been experimenting with memory extraction, using focused magnetic pulses to not just map memory locations, but to read them, to access the actual content stored in neural pathways. His notes were fragmentary, obsessive. He claimed he made a breakthrough, found a way to not just read memories, but to transfer them, to pull them out of one brain and store them digitally, to preserve human experiences in a format that could be analyzed, studied, understood. The last entry was dated 3 weeks before he disappeared. He wrote about side effects, about patients losing memories, about something unexpected happening with the extracted data, about voices, about something looking back through the memories, something that wasn't human, wasn't patient, wasn't anything he recognized. Then nothing. The practice shut down. Dr. Reeves vanished. Nobody knew where he went, or if they did, they weren't talking. I should have stopped, should have dismantled the device, should have reported it to medical authorities. But I was curious, fascinated. This was revolutionary research. This could change everything we knew about consciousness, memory, identity. I started small, tested the device on myself, targeted a simple memory, nothing important, just a random Tuesday afternoon from when I was 12. Activated the extraction protocol. The sensation was indescribable, like something reaching into my skull, into my thoughts, gently pulling, unspooling, taking something that was fundamentally me and making it external, making it other. The device's screen lit up. Data streamed across it. Neural patterns, synaptic connections, and images, actual visual data from my memory. I could see myself at 12, could see my childhood bedroom, could watch the memory play out in perfect detail on the screen. But I couldn't remember it anymore. The memory was gone from my mind, completely erased. I knew I had a Tuesday afternoon when I was 12. Knew I done something, but the actual experience was missing, stolen, transferred to a hard drive. I should have been horrified, should have recognized the violation, the danger. Instead, I was elated. This was proof, confirmation that memories were transferable, that consciousness could be digitized, that human experience could be preserved forever. I started testing on patients, always with consent, always targeting minor memories, random childhood moments nobody would miss. Nothing traumatic, nothing important, just small experiences, building my database, perfecting the technique. Margaret Townsend was my 5th subject. I asked about her missing memories. She confirmed she'd seen Dr. Reeves, confirmed he used a device on her, said she signed a consent form but couldn't quite remember what it said. Just knew she lost parts of her childhood afterward. I extracted one of her memories. A summer day when she was 9, playing in a creek, catching tadpoles. Simple, pure, the kind of memory that makes childhood precious. The extraction worked perfectly. The memory appeared on my screen in vivid detail. I could see young Margaret, could see the creek, could see sunshine filtering through trees, could feel her joy, her wonder, her complete absorption in the moment. Then the memory changed, the image distorted, twisted. Margaret's face stretched. Her smile became too wide, too full of teeth that were too sharp. The creek water turned dark, thick. Something moved beneath the surface. Something large, something with too many eyes that were looking at me, looking through the memory, looking at the person watching this stored experience. I shut down the device. The screen went dark, but I could still see after images, could still see those eyes, could still feel them watching. That night, I dreamed about the memories I extracted. All of them, playing simultaneously in my mind. But they were wrong, corrupted. Each one had something extra in it, something that wasn't there originally. Shadows that moved wrong, faces in backgrounds that turned to watch, sounds that didn't match the visuals. And underneath it all, a presence, something vast, something patient, something that existed in the space where memories lived, in the neural pathways, in the electric patterns that made consciousness possible. It had been waiting, watching through the memories I stolen, learning about our world through the experiences I digitized. And now it knew I existed, knew I could see it, knew I was the doorway it needed. More patients started coming in, all complaining of missing childhood memories. All had seen Dr. Reeves. All had pieces of their past surgically removed by his device. And all of them had the same look in their eyes, the same haunted expression, like something was missing that went deeper than memory, like part of their soul had been extracted along with their experiences. I examined the device more carefully, found additional modifications I missed, extra storage drives hidden in the base, thousands of extracted memories. Dr. Reeves had been obsessed, had extracted memories from over 100 patients, had created a massive database of human childhood experiences, and something lived in that database, something that had learned to exist in digital form, something that fed on stored memories. That grew stronger with each new experience added to its collection. I could feel it now, watching me, waiting for me to extract more memories, to give it more fuel, more data, more windows into our world. It wanted to understand humanity, wanted to learn everything about us, our fears, our joys, our weaknesses, and it wanted out, wanted to move beyond stored memories, wanted to exist in living minds, to inhabit actual brains instead of hard drives. The patients whose memories I extracted started changing, subtle at first, small personality shifts, different preferences, new habits, like something was filling the empty spaces where their memories used to be, something that was learning to be human by inhabiting the gaps. Margaret Townsend came back for a follow-up. She seemed different, spoke differently, moved differently. When I looked in her eyes, something looked back that wasn't entirely Margaret. Something ancient, patient, hungry. She asked about the device, asked if I extracted more memories, asked if I was planning to continue. Her voice was too calm, too interested, like she was asking on behalf of something else, something that desperately wanted me to continue. I refused, said I was shutting down the research, destroying the device, erasing the stored memories. She smiled, said it was too late for that, said the memories were already distributed, already spreading, already infecting the minds of everyone who lost their childhoods. 47 people. That is how many had missing memories. That is how many potential hosts for whatever existed in the stored data. 47 doorways for something inhuman to enter our world. I tried to warn people, called the CDC, called the FBI, called anyone who might listen, told them about the device, about the extracted memories, about the presence living in the data. They thought I was insane, told me to seek help, to take time off, to stop making wild accusations. The patients started gathering, meeting in groups, talking in strange cadences, their personalities blending, merging, becoming something unified, something collective, something that was learning to coordinate 47 bodies, 47 minds, 47 perspectives on the world. I destroyed the device, smashed it with a hammer, burned the hard drives, erased every digital record I could find. But it didn't matter. The presence was already out, already distributed among the patients, already learning to be human using their bodies as puppets. Dr. Reeves had left one final note. Hidden, encrypted. I found it 3 days before I fled with Scylla. It explained everything. He discovered the presence by accident, had been terrified, had tried to contain it, to destroy it, had failed. He wrote that the presence existed in the structure of memory itself, in the pattern, in the electrical encoding. It wasn't a virus or a program. It was something fundamental, something that had always existed in the spaces between thoughts, between neurons, in the quantum uncertainty of consciousness itself. And we, given it form, given it substance, by extracting memories and storing them digitally, we created a bridge. Let something that existed only in neural patterns cross over into electronic systems. And from there, back into other minds, other brains, other hosts. Dr. Reeves disappeared trying to stop it, trying to destroy every extracted memory, trying to close the bridge. I don't know if he succeeded. Don, do you know if he is still alive? Just know that I am following his path, running, hiding, trying to stay ahead of the 47. Because they were looking for me. I can feel them, can sense them searching. They want me because I understand, because I know what they really are, because I might be the only person who can stop them, or because the only person who can help them spread, can extract more memories, can create more hosts, can give them access to more minds, more bodies, more doorways into our world. I am in Montana now. Small town, quiet, anonymous. But yesterday, I saw someone with that look, that haunted expression, That empty space behind their eyes where childhood memories used to be. They smiled at me, asked if I was a doctor, asked if I knew anything about memory loss. And I knew. They found me. The 47. They spread beyond Wasilla, beyond Alaska, finding others, creating more hosts, building their network one stolen memory at a time. I am writing this as a warning, as documentation, as evidence for whoever finds it. If you meet someone who can remember their childhood, someone with gaps where memory should be, someone who seems slightly wrong, slightly off, slightly not entirely human anymore, run, Don, to talk to them, Don, to let them near you, Don, to let them close enough to touch, because they relearning, getting better, and they looking for more hosts, more doorways, more ways to spread. And if a doctor ever offers to help with your memories, to extract them, to study them, to preserve them, refuse, destroy the device, run, because some things live in memory. Some things exist in the patterns that make us who we are. And when we try to extract those patterns, to digitize consciousness, to understand the fundamental nature of human experience, we open doors that should stay closed. We invite something in, something ancient, something patient, something that's been waiting in the spaces between thoughts for us to finally notice it, finally acknowledge it, finally give it the bridge it needs. The 47 were just the beginning, just the first wave, the prototype, and they re-recruiting, growing, spreading their infection one stolen childhood at a time. I can feel them getting closer, can sense their network expanding, can hear voices in my own memories now, whispers, suggestions, something trying to communicate through my own neural pathways, through my own experiences, through the very thoughts that make me Sarah Mitchell. Soon, I want to be entirely me anymore. Soon, I'll be one of them. Another host, another doorway, another mind infiltrated by something that learned to exist between synapses and electric pulses and the quantum uncertainty of conscious thought. And when that happens, I'll have everything. All my knowledge, all my research, all my understanding of how to extract memories, how to create more hosts, how to spread faster, further, until everyone has gaps where their childhoods used to be, until everyone is infected, until humanity itself becomes just another host, another doorway, another tool for something that was never human and never will be. Wasilla was just the start, just the experiment, just the proof of concept. The real invasion is coming, is already here, is spreading through memory loss and childhood gaps and that empty look behind infected eyes. And nobody will believe me until it's too late, until we're all part of it, until 47 becomes 4,000 becomes 4 million, until the infection reaches critical mass and something ancient finally steps through all those open doorways and claims the world it's been watching through stolen memories for so long. Remember Wasilla, remember the 47, remember what we forgot, before you forget to. Story 9. Bleeding glacier. I collected samples from a glacier that bleeds human blood, and the DNA tests came back showing genetic markers that should not exist for another 1,000 years. My name is Dr. Sarah Chen. I am a glaciologist, 44 years old, with a PhD from MIT and 20 years of field experience studying ice formations across the globe. I have always dealt in facts, in measurable data, in phenomena that can be explained through science. But what I found in the Wrangell Mountains of Alaska in the summer of 2023 has shattered every assumption I ever held about the natural world, and about what might be waiting for us, frozen in ice, as the planet continues to warm. The first reports came from a bush pilot named Tom Mackenzie who flew supplies to remote mining operations in the Wrangells. He claimed he had seen a glacier bleeding. Not the typical rusty discharge you sometimes see from iron oxide deposits, but bright red liquid flowing down the face of the ice like an open wound. He took photographs, sent them to the Geological Survey Office in Anchorage, and was promptly dismissed as either confused or seeking attention. But I saw those photographs. The color was wrong, too vivid, too organic. I convinced my research team to investigate, secured funding for a 2-week expedition, and in July we flew into the mountains with enough equipment to conduct a thorough analysis of whatever was causing the discharge. The glacier was stunning and horrifying in equal measure. It sat in a remote valley, surrounded by jagged peaks, accessible only by helicopter. The ice was ancient, probably 10,000 years old at its deepest layers. And running down its southern face was a stream of thick, red liquid that looked exactly like blood flowing from a wound. The smell hit us first when we approached on foot. Metallic, organic, the distinct copper scent of blood, but mixed with something else. Something that made my sinuses burn and my eyes water. My team set up base camp a safe distance from the discharge point, and we spent the first day taking preliminary samples and photographs. The liquid was viscous, thicker than water, and it left residue on our collection containers that looked disturbingly like coagulated blood. We packaged the samples carefully, labeled them, prepared them for transport back to our lab in Anchorage. But I could not wait 2 weeks for results. I had brought portable testing equipment, basic analysis tools that would give us preliminary data. The first test confirmed what my eyes were already telling me. The liquid contained hemoglobin, red blood cells, proteins found in mammalian blood. But the concentrations were wrong, the cellular structure slightly off, like looking at human blood through a distorted lens. It was close enough to be familiar, but different enough to be deeply unsettling. My colleague, Dr. James Rivera, ran a DNA analysis using our portable sequencer. We expected to find some kind of animal blood, maybe from a creature that had died and been frozen in the glacier centuries ago, now being released as the ice melted. What we found instead made no sense. The DNA was human, or mostly human, 97% matched to Homo sapiens, but that remaining 3% was unlike anything in our genetic databases. It contained sequences we had never seen before, coding for proteins that should not exist in the human genome. And more disturbing, it contained markers for genetic modifications that, according to our current understanding of biotechnology, would not be possible for decades. We were looking at blood from a genetically modified human, a human that had been altered in ways our science could not yet achieve. And that blood was coming from inside a glacier that had been frozen solid for thousands of years. James wanted to leave immediately. He argued that we were dealing with something beyond our expertise, that we needed to report this to higher authorities and let specialists handle it. But I convinced him to stay. We had 2 weeks of supplies, state-of-the-art equipment, and a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to investigate a phenomenon that could reshape our understanding of human history. That was my second mistake. My first was coming here at all. We began drilling core samples from the glacier, trying to locate the source of the bleeding. The ice was harder than normal, denser, like it had been compressed under extreme pressure. Our drills overheated constantly, requiring frequent stops to cool down and replace bits. But we pushed deeper, extracting cylindrical cores that we could analyze layer by layer. At 70 feet down, we found the first body, or what was left of it. Frozen in the ice was a human form, perfectly preserved, curled in a fetal position. But it was wrong. The proportions were off. The limbs too long, the fingers extended into points, the skull elongated. It looked like a human being that had been stretched and twisted by some horrific process. We extracted tissue samples carefully, analyzing them with the same portable equipment. The DNA matched the blood, the same mostly human genetic code with those impossible modifications. We were looking at a person who had been surgically or genetically altered into something that was no longer quite human. And there were more of them. Over the next 3 days, we found 17 bodies frozen in the glacier at various depths. All modified, all transformed into these elongated, distorted versions of human beings. Some had additional limbs. Some had organs in the wrong places. Some had structures we could not identify, biological systems that served no purpose we could understand. They had not died naturally. Each body showed signs of violence, wounds, trauma. They had been killed, then frozen, then buried in this remote glacier where nobody would find them for thousands of years. Except the glacier was melting. Climate change was releasing what had been hidden, bringing these impossible bodies back to the surface, letting their blood flow down the mountainside like the earth itself was bleeding. The nightmare started on day 5. All 4 members of our team began experiencing the same dream. We would be standing in a vast, sterile facility filled with glass chambers. Inside each chamber was a human being in various stages of transformation. We could see them changing, their bodies stretching and mutating, their screams silent behind the glass. And standing in the center of the facility was a figure in white, watching with clinical detachment, taking notes on a tablet. We compared our dreams over breakfast. Every detail matched: the layout of the facility, the appearance of the figure, even the numbers on the glass chambers. We were not just dreaming. We were remembering, but remembering something that had never happened to us. That was when I realized the blood was not just blood. It was a carrier, a medium for information. We had been exposed to it, breathed in its vapors, let it seep into our skin through our gloves. And it was transferring memories, experiences, data encoded in genetic material, passed from the bodies in the glacier directly into our minds. James started speaking in a language none of us recognized. fluent, complex phrases that poured out of him without conscious thought. I recorded him, played it back, ran it through linguistic analysis software. The program identified it as a constructed language, something artificial, created for a specific purpose. A technical language designed for precision communication in scientific contexts. The language of whoever had created those bodies, whoever had modified them, experimented on them, killed them, and buried them in this glacier. On day 7, we found the source. At 140 feet down, our drill broke through into a cavity. A large, hollow space carved into the heart of the glacier. We lowered a camera on a cable, equipped with lights and video recording equipment. The cavity was a laboratory, or what remained of one. Frozen equipment lined the walls, tables covered with instruments, storage units filled with samples and specimens, and in the center, a large cylindrical chamber made of some kind of transparent material, now cracked and leaking that red liquid. Inside the chamber was a body, but this one was different. It had not been modified or transformed. It was perfectly human, preserved in the blood like an insect in amber. A woman, maybe 30 years old, her eyes open and staring, her mouth slightly parted. She was wearing clothing I did not recognize, made from materials that looked advanced, synthetic. Around her neck was a device, a small rectangular object on a chain, about the size of a thumb drive. Our camera zoomed in on it, and I could see text etched into its surface. English text, modern English. It read, Dr. Elizabeth Thorne, Human Genetics Division, Project Chronos, 2847. I stared at the monitor, my brain refusing to process what I was seeing. The year 2847, 824 years in the future. This was not an ancient laboratory. It was a future laboratory. Or it had been a future laboratory before something catastrophic happened and it ended up buried in a glacier that had been frozen for 10,000 years. Time was wrong here. Somehow, in this remote valley in the Wrangell Mountains, past and future had collapsed into the same space. This facility had existed in 2847, had conducted horrific experiments on human subjects, and then had been displaced backward through time, buried in ancient ice, waiting to be discovered. The implications were staggering. If this facility had been sent back in time, if these bodies and their modified genetics had been frozen here for millennia, then they had been part of our past all along. The genetic modifications we were seeing, the impossible biotechnology, it was all from our future. And it had been influencing human evolution from the shadows, seeping out through groundwater, through animals that fed on the glacier, this runoff, through the ecosystem itself. We were not looking at an isolated incident. We were looking at a bootstrap paradox. Human genetics modified in the future, sent to the past, influencing the development of humans who would eventually create those modifications. A closed loop with no clear beginning or end. James collapsed that night. His body went into seizures, his eyes rolling back, his mouth foaming. We tried to stabilize him, but there was nothing we could do without proper medical equipment. He died within an hour. His last words spoken in that artificial language, describing procedures and experiments in clinical detail. The rest of us evacuated the next morning. We took our samples, our recordings, all our data, and we left that bleeding glacier behind. We reported James' death as an accident, a fall during sample collection. We did not mention the bodies, did not mention the laboratory, did not mention the impossible date, because who would believe us? And more importantly, what would happen if people did believe us? If governments and corporations knew there was future technology buried in that glacier, technology that could reshape human genetics, what would they do to get it? How many more people would die in the rush to exploit what was frozen in that ice? The samples we brought back were confiscated within a week. Men in dark suits arrived at our lab, showed credentials I could not verify, and took everything. Our computers were wiped. Our notes were seized. We were told to forget what we had seen, that national security was involved, that speaking about this to anyone would result in serious legal consequences. But I kept one sample, a small vial of that red liquid, hidden in my home freezer, wrapped in aluminum foil behind a bag of frozen peas. I look at it sometimes, this blood from the future, this carrier of impossible memories, and I wonder what else is buried in that glacier. What other secrets are waiting to melt out of the ice as the climate continues to warm? And I wonder about Dr. Elizabeth Thorne, frozen in that chamber, her eyes open and staring, her future already past. Did she know what would happen? Did she choose to send herself and her laboratory backward through time as some kind of desperate message? Or was it an accident, a malfunction that trapped her and her experiments in ancient ice? I still have the dreams. Every night, I see that sterile facility. I see the glass chambers. I see the figure in white taking notes. And I see the subjects transforming, their bodies being rewritten at the genetic level, becoming something new. Something that might be better adapted for whatever future we are heading toward. Or something that represents a future we should fear more than death itself. The glacier is still bleeding. I check satellite imagery regularly, watching that red stream flow down the mountainside. It is getting larger, more liquid being released as the ice melts. More of those bodies being exposed to air and sunlight for the first time in thousands of years. More memories bleeding out into the world, carried by that impossible blood, waiting for someone to breathe them in and remember a future that has not happened yet, but will happen, because we have seen it frozen in the ice, and time, I've learned, is not a line. It is a circle, and we are all trapped inside it, bleeding. And so the whisper fades into the wind. Alaska keeps its secrets under ice, but sometimes, for a moment, it lets us peek inside. If you haven't already, subscribe and tap that bell. More true stories and legends wait in the dark. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from, or if you felt the chill of something unexplainable yourself. Share it in the comments. Midnight Whispers isn't just a channel, it's a campfire across the miles, burning in the endless night. Until next time, stay warm and keep your lights low.